Book 3, Chapter 96. Different names for the mind. Vasishta said, the mind is mere thought, and thought is the mind in motion. Its actions are directed by the nature of the thoughts, and the result of the acts is felt by everybody in his mind. Ram said, Sage, please explain in more detail the immaterial mind as opposed to the material body and its inseparable property of will or volition. Vasishta replied, the nature of the mind is known to be composed of the property of will, which is an attribute of the infinite and almighty power of the Supreme Soul. The mind is known to be the form of that self-moving principle, which determines men's doubt between the affirmative and negative sides as whether it is so or not. The mind is known to be the form of the ego, which is ignorant of the self-manifesting soul of God and believes itself to be the subject of its thoughts and actions. The mind is of the nature of imagination, kalpana, which is always busy in its operations. Therefore, the inactivity of the mind is as impossible in this world as it is for an intelligent man not to think, as there is no difference in the essence of fire and heat. So there is no difference whatever between the mind and its activity, and so between the mind and soul. The mind is known by many names according to its faculties and functions, its various thoughts and desires, and their manifold operations and consequences. The divine mind is said to be distributed into all souls by mistake and without any reason, because the all is without any substance or substratum and is indivisible in its nature. It is a mere fabrication of our desires and fantasies to diversify it in different persons. Whoever set his desires in anything as if it were a reality finds the same to be attended with the like fruit as he had expected of it. It is the movement of the mind that is said and perceived by us to be the source of our actions, and the actions of the mind are as various as the branches, leaves, and fruits of trees. Whatever is determined by the mind is readily brought into performance by the external organs of action. Therefore, because the mind is the cause of action, it is identified with the effect. Mind, understanding, egoism, intellect, consciousness, action, and imagination, together with memory, desire, ignorance, and effort, are all synonyms of the mind. Sensation, nature, delusion, and actions are also words applied to the mind to bewilder one's understanding. The simultaneous collision of many sensations diverts the mind from its clear sight of the object of its thought and causes it to turn about in many ways. Ram asked, "How is it, sage, that so many words with different meaning were invented to express the transcendent cause of our consciousness, the mind, and to heap them on the same thing solely for our confusion?" Shishta replied, "As man began to lose sight of his consciousness and labored under suppositions about his self, he found the mind to be the waking principle within him. When man, after considering himself and other things, comes to understand them in their true light, he is then said to have his understanding, buddhi. When man, by false conception of himself, assumes a personality by his pride, he is called an egoist. With the principle of ego, or egoism, causing his bondage on earth. Absolute egoism is doubting everything other than individual self-existence. Thoughts pass from one object to another in quick succession, and like the whims of children, shifts from one thing to another without forming a right judgment of any. The mind is identified with acts done by the exercise of a power immanent in itself as the agent. The result of the actions, whether physical or moral, good or bad, returns to the mind in their effects. The mind is said to be fanciful because it holds on to fleeting fantasies and ignores its solid and certain truths. It is also called imagination because it presents various images of the objects of its desire. Hita kapana. It is called katkataliya sanyoga, or accidental assemblage of fancied objects. It is defined as the agglutinative and associative power that accumulates materials for imagination. Memory or retention is the power of the mind to retain an image, whether known or unknown before. And if it were a certainty already known, when attended with the effort of recalling it to the mind, it is called recollection. Cravings to possess objects of past enjoyment and the mind's efforts to attain other things is called its desires. When the mind's clear sight of the light of the soul or self is hidden by the shadow of other gross things, which appear to be real instead of the true spiritual, it is called ignorance. It is another name for deluded understanding. The next is doubt, which entraps the dubious mind in the snare of skepticism and tends to destroy the soul by causing it to disbelieve and forget the Supreme Spirit. The mind is called sensation because all its actions of hearing, feeling, seeing, smelling, thinking, and enjoying serve to delight the senses, which convey the impressions back to the mind. The mind that views all phenomena of nature in the Supreme Spirit and takes outward nature as a copy of the eternal mind of God is called nature itself. The mind is called the Maya, or magic, because it converts the real into the unreal and the unreal into real, showing realities as unrealities and the vice versa by turns. The mind is called error or mistake of our judgment, giving assent to that which is untrue and its contrary. The causes of error are said to be ignorance, avidya, and passions, tamas. The actions of the physical organ of senses are seeing, hearing, feeling, tasting, and smelling. But the mind is the cause of both actions and their acts. The intellect, chit, bewildered in its view of the intellectual world, chaitya, manifests itself in the form of the mind and becomes the subject of the various functions that are attributed to it. Being changed into the category of the mind, consciousness loses its original state of purity and becomes subject to 100 desires of its own making. Its abstract knowledge of general truths becomes shadowed by its preconceptions of concrete and discrete gross bodies, so it comes to the knowledge of numbers and parts and is overwhelmed by the multiplicity of its thoughts and the objects of desire. Consciousness is variously named the living principle, and the mind by most people on earth, but it is known as exercise of intellect and understanding, chit and buddhi, by the wise. The learned give the intellect, spoiled by falling away from the soul, supreme soul, various names according to its successive phases and functions. The wise give intellect such different names because it is spoiled by various desires and the variety of their objects. Ram said, "O sir, you are acquainted with all truths. Please tell me whether the mind is a material or immaterial thing. So far, I have been unable to determine this." Vasishta replied, "The mind, O Ram, is not completely a gross substance, nor completely an intelligent principle. Originally, it is as intelligent as consciousness, but being sullied by the evils of the world and the passions and desires of the body, it takes the name of the mind. Consciousness, Chit, which is the cause of the world, is called heart, Chitta, when it is situated in the bosom of sentient bodies with all its affections and feelings, belong. Then it has a nature between goodness and badness. When the heart lacks a uniform certainty to its purpose and a steadiness in itself, it feels inside and reflects all the changes and vicissitudes of the outer world. Consciousness, hanging between its own intelligence and a belief in gross objects, takes the name of the mind. It is spoiled by contact with outward objects. When the action of consciousness or the facility of the intellect's reasoning is weakened by sensations and becomes dull by its inward impurity, then it is called the mind, which is neither a gross material thing nor an intelligent spiritual principle. The intellectual principle is called by many names, such as mind, understanding, ego, and the individual soul or principle of animation. The mind bears its different names according to the variety of its functions. Just like an actor in a theater appears under different names and costumes, depending on his dramatic parts on the stage. As a man passes under many titles according to his various occupations and professions, so the mind takes different names according to the various operations of its nature. Besides the names I have already mentioned for the mind, the disputants in mental philosophy have invented many other agreeably to their diverse theories. They have attributed many names to the mind according to the views in which they want to exhibit its nature, such as calling it intellect, understanding, or sensation, and so forth. One takes it as dull matter, and another as the living principle. Someone calls it ego, while others apply the term understanding. Ram, I have told you that individual ego, mind, the light of understanding, and the will to create are only different properties of the one and same internal principle. The Nyaya philosophy has taken the mind in different lights according to its own view of them. The Sankhya system explains perception and senses in a way peculiar to itself. In this manner, all these terms are taken in very different meanings by the different systems of Mimamsa, Vishika, Arhata, and Buddhist philosophy. The Pancharatra and some other systems have given them particular meanings inconsistent with one another. All these various doctrines arising at different times and in distant countries lead at last to the same Supreme Being, like the very many different ways leading their passengers to the same imperial city. Ignorance of this supreme truth and understanding among conflicting doctrines cause the adherents of different systems and sects to carry out endless and bitterly acrimonious disputes among themselves. The disputants maintain their particular position by their respective dogmatism, just like passengers persist in their accustomed paths as the best suited to them. It is wrong to say that everything is the fruit of our acts, and therefore mankind should only be concerned about the performance of their actions. According to men's various perspectives, they have come up with their explanations in their own way. The mind receives its various names from its different functions. Just like a man is called an early bather, Nataka, from his acts of sacred ablutions, and a donor from his religious gifts. As the actor gets many titles according to the different characters he performs, so the mind takes the name of a living being, Jiva, from its animation of the body and its desires. The mind is also said to be the heart that is perceived by everybody as residing within himself. A man without heart has no feeling or sensation. It is the heart that feels the inner pleasure or pain derived from sight or touch, hearing or smelling, and eating and drinking of pleasurable or painful things. As light shows the colors of things to sight, so the mind is the organ that reflects and shows the sensations of all sensible objects in the head. Whoever thinks the mind is a dull substance, or whose gross understanding cannot understand the nature of consciousness, is the dullest of beings. The mind is neither intelligence, chaitana, nor inert matter, jhana. It is individual ego that has sprung amidst the various joys and grief in this world. The mind is one with divine consciousness, perceives the world as absorbed into itself. But the mind, polluted with matter, falls into the error of taking the world for for real. Know, Rama, that neither the pure immaterial intellect nor matter as gross as inert stone can be the cause of the material world. Know then, O Raghava, that neither intelligence nor inertia is the cause of the world. The mind is the cause of visible objects, just as the mind is the light which unfolds them to view. Where there is no mind, there is no perception of the outer world. Dull matter does not know of the existence of anything. Everything is extinct with the extinction of the mind. The mind has many synonyms depending on its many activities. Just like the one duration of time undergoes 100 different names depending on the variations of its time and season. If ego is not recognized as a mental action, and if sensations are reckoned as actions of the body, then the name living principle still applies to all acts of the body and mind. What other names or qualities of the mind are mentioned in the reasoning of different systems of philosophy, and sometimes by the advocates of an opinion, and at other times by their adversaries. They are neither intelligible nor indistinguishable from one another. They are all powers of the same mind, which, like the flowing sea, pours its waters into innumerable outlets. As soon as men begin to attribute materialistic powers and force to the nature of pure consciousness, they fall into the error of these varieties of their own making. As a spider lets out its thread from itself, in the same manner, the inert has sprung from consciousness, and matter has come into existence from the ever-active spirit of Brahma. Ignorance has introduced various opinions concerning the essence of the mind. From this arose the various different expressions among opponents, all of which have the same meaning, consciousness. The same pure consciousness is labeled the mind, understanding, living principle, and egoism. The same is expressed by the words intelligence, heart, animation, and many other symptoms, which, being taken as meaning the same thing, should put an end to all dispute. Well, we've had quite a long discussion of the nature, the different names for the mind. What have we learned? Do we know now what the mind is? Has all of this given us a clear understanding of the mind? Basically, we're attempting to analyze the quality and properties of an illusion. So how is that even a rational study? It's like seeing a mirage in the distance and then spending a lot of time analyzing all the aspects of the mirage. There we have a shimmering surface. It appears to be a surface. It looks like a lake. It looks like the sun is reflecting off of the water. It looks like the water is moving. It looks like there are ripples in that lake. Maybe there's even some animals there around the lake. Maybe there's a duck on the lake. Maybe there's fish in the lake. I don't see any trees around that lake, but surely there's grass. Grass always grows around water. And on we can discuss the nature of that illusion. And then we shift our perspective just a little bit. Perhaps we're walking and we take one more step. Then we look again and it's gone. That's the nature of the mind. It is pure illusion. It is just like that mirage in the desert. And one shift of perspective causes it to vanish and disappear. The mind ceases to exist as a living principle. When we take that one perspective shift into the silent witness, once we move our perception into the absolute senses of the silent witness, it is obvious that the mind is a mirage. It is an illusion. It is a ripple on the non-existent lake of the mirage. In other parts of the Yoga Vasishtha, Vasishtha is fond of saying it is the son of a barren woman. So think about that. That's called an oxymoron. The mind is literally an oxymoron. It both exists and doesn't exist. It all depends on where the mind is viewed. When the mind is viewed from the perspective of the silent witness, it obviously does not exist. It's like smoke arising from smoldering logs. And at any moment, it just simply disappears when the logs stop smoldering. It only exists because there are underlying karmic traces. And these karmic traces literally do not exist, but appear to exist as frequencies and vibrations within the consciousness. But as we go deep into the existence of even the karmic traces, we see they're composed of nothing substantial. The closer we get to an illusion, the more obvious it becomes that this is an illusion. And so I think we can safely assume that all the qualities of the mind are, as Shista said in one previous verse, like the different names we give to a stream of time. We might call a very short amount of time a second, and a longer amount a minute, and a much longer amount an hour. But what does that do to define time? Because as we know, we can go into this concept of time and not find anything substantial there. Time is very much like the mind in that regard. Time appears real when we are embedded in the illusion of existence. As soon as we let go of the illusion of existence, time disappears. This is the quality of eternity. That is used to describe that part of ourself that is beyond time, the eternal part of ourself, the silent witness. Eventually, our interest shifts. It shifts from studying the useless, completely irrelevant and illusory outer world, and begins to study that which is real, pure consciousness. And once it begins to study pure consciousness, it realizes I am that pure consciousness. I am the pure consciousness that is looking through a viewpoint or a perspective. And what is that viewpoint or perspective? That is even unreal. As soon as we take a particular perspective and we say, oh, this is my body, this is my mind, these are my thoughts, then we've lost our connection with the ultimate value of the silent witness. We are only vaguely connected with the silent witness, perhaps not even at all. once we begin thinking like that. And the key principle, the active word here is thinking. Thinking, which is the main, really the only principle of the mind. Because if there is no thinking, there is no mind, is there? The mind only exists by virtue of thinking. Without thinking, no mind. So we give this agency, we can call it, this vibration, this aspect of illusory existence, the name mind, and we attribute to it various qualities. And eventually we realize there's nothing there. I am pure consciousness. I do not exist. I am the source of all that is said to exist, but I am pure being. And when we assume that perspective, then we have a right perspective. And that's the whole purpose of everything we do. Is to turn around the habit, the habitual viewing, the habitual connection with the illusion of existence. And we let go of that illusion of existence.